everybody. You know, they told me I had to pick a song to play me up on the stage, and I intentionally did not pick a song because I'm a behavioral psychologist. I'm like, I wonder what song they think would fit me. I don't get no. I don't know if that fits. But anyway, really great to be here. I am massively interested in engagement. I'm actually dropping employee for a moment because I'm interested in it and have been for 30 years in my research and my work everywhere. I started out looking, and I'm a behavioral scientist by training. I started out looking at why are people engaged in religious beliefs, and what makes people engaged in certain things in a deep way, in a passionate way, because that captures so much passion in people's lives and so much meaning. And then I looked at it in education, and more recently I've been looking at it in interactive entertainment and doing motivational design about how do you create meaningful experiences for customers that not just keep them engaged in the bad sense of let's all stare at our phones forever, but in the sense that it's actually satisfying to people and moving them forward. And so, of course, we've also been doing a tremendous amount of work in the employee engagement space, and I just have been really appreciative of working with Jenna and the entire team at HCI in this research project and going over some things. This talk today is going to be kind of inspired by the report. I didn't really want to give a talk where I showed a lot of graphs that you can easily look at on your phone. Instead, let's try to drill down into some things that were really confirmed by this report, and also things that I've seen in a lot of other research that's out there. And I want to start today by asking for your permission to not define employee engagement. Is it okay if I do not define employee engagement? People are not very many people are heartbroken about this, right? Almost every employee engagement talk starts with, hey, let's define employee engagement, or the talk is, these are the components of employee engagement. And when I thought about starting with a definition of employee engagement, I said, you know what? Not only do I not really want to do that, because you guys all kind of know what employee engagement is, but I also think that it's going to detract in some way from one of my points. I want to get us to focus in a different direction today. And so whatever your definition of employee engagement, I bet it's pretty good. I bet it's pretty good because I'm going to let you in on a secret. This might be blasphemy to say. I don't think employee engagement is that hard to recognize. I don't think it's that hard to measure. It's one of those things that is a roll-up of a tremendous amount. I mean, look, the HCI logo is on fire. It's a tremendous amount of passion and purpose and all that. Saying, yeah, we can get behind it. And it's incredibly important because of how aspirational that is, right? We need that aspiration. We need our workers to have that aspiration. We know employee engagement when we see it. And so we can actually measure it pretty effectively because we just go for those. I love my job. It's a great measure of employee engagement right there. That's for free. You can just go and use that. So I'm not going to measure that or talk about that because we all sort of know what it is. But because it's easy, and this is what I do want to get to, because it's easy, we are running into a problem, a significant problem. And to illustrate that, I want to tell a little story. Maybe you've heard it. I think my dad told this to me a long time ago in a context I just don't remember today, but it was supposed to be meaningful and growthful for me as a human being. A man's walking down the street one night, and as he's walking down, he sees up ahead under the street lamp, he sees somebody who's crouched over and looking around. He's like, oh, I wonder what's going on. He goes and says, hey, can I help you? He says, yeah, I lost my keys. I can't find my keys. I can't get in. It's too late. I can't call anybody. I got to find my keys. And so our Good Samaritan says, I'll help you find your keys. And so he begins to look in earnest with the lost keys gentleman. And they can't find it, and after about 10 minutes, he's like, well, maybe I can help here. He says, so tell me, sir, can you point exactly to where you lost your keys? And lost key guy says, yeah, I lost them way back over there. You can't really see because it's very dark. Said, well, if you lost them way over there, why are we standing over here looking for the keys? Because this is where the light is. Right? And that story is actually, I want to call that the street lamp dilemma. Right? We look at things like employee engagement because that's where the light is. We can see it. I see this all the time in my work. It's really easy to measure outcomes. We can measure behaviors really easily. We can ask people for their satisfaction and for their engagement and would they recommend things. And we can ask all those questions and get pretty accurate answers because those are all outcomes. Those are all things under the street lamp. So we all have a pretty good measure of engagement, right? 90% in our research of all organizations have a pretty strong measure of engagement. But you know where they have problems? 70% say, we don't really know what to do next. We're not confident we know what to do next with those numbers. We don't really know what they mean, or we don't know what direction to go in, because that's the other problem when you roll everything up into outcomes. You don't really know what things mean. You don't know how to take that granular action. And so many of the talks today, and everyone that's out here, you're tasked with making this real for your organizations. Your leaders want to see that it's working. They want to see proof that it's working. Your managers are saying, how can you make this relevant to me? Your employees want to see the results of these things. So making this stuff relevant is extremely important. But that said, right, in the survey we just did with ACI, the research, and you'll see this in the report, only about half, about 57% of employee engagement professionals who have the job of working on employee engagement, right? So this is the experts in employee engagement, believe that their employee engagement initiatives are actually working. So, you know, glass half full, I guess, but also 57% for people working in the field. It's even lower when you look more generally and you ask in companies. And so we have this challenge of trying to figure out what's going on, and we need to spend more time not looking at engagement and looking underneath the street lamp. We need to look back, we need to look upstream, we need to look at the causal elements, we need to understand what's happening. So we have a model that can allow us to actually move that needle. And what I'm going to talk about today will be about the things that will move that needle, no matter what that needle, no matter how you measure it. I'm very confident no matter how you measure it, the needle will move. And it's not just that we have this problem when we're talking about our jobs and wanting to really help people. We also have this problem economically, and I apologize. People who speak don't share their slide decks. You've probably seen this how many times today? 6 or 7 times today. This is the famous Gallup line. I have the most boring version of it of any speaker today, but I did put a little sleeping guy on top of it. All right? We all see this, and we all try to do a couple things with it. We're like, okay, well, that's too generalized. It's taken out of context. You really have to look at it this way. It doesn't matter. This is the data that's out in the world. This is the data that keeps getting collected. We're not moving that needle despite the fact that we're making this kind of a massive investment in employee engagement. And so we have a significant step missing, right? We have a significant step missing in a problem that we know all of our leaders, that 80%, 85% of all leadership will cite as a top priority employee engagement. But again, there's a confidence gap. Those leaders, even less so than the HR professionals, about 25 to 30% are confident that their organization can actually execute on it. So there's that gap of confidence. So what we're going to talk about and move into is a way to actually bring about transformational change to that issue. Instead of just trench warfare and trying to grind out the details and move that needle a little bit every time, let's find some big levers that we can pull in how we're approaching this issue and what we're focusing on in engagement. Before I get into what those things are, I want to talk a little bit about what they're not. And this is not necessarily coming out of all of the brilliant people in this room, but it is coming out of my conversations with HR people in a lot of different areas, and when I go to conferences, and when I sit on panels, and when I read articles, right? Again, it's not coming out. The focus shouldn't be better ways to measure this in your organization. Better ways, let's just talk about this more. That's the engagement problem I was talking about. You already know, you can recognize this guy, you know what this looks like in your organization. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure that you want this level of engagement in your organization. I think this is problematic and you should rethink your free coffee policy. There's a second issue that I want you to put aside for a moment, and that's, I don't have enough resources. And the reason I want you to put it aside is not that you don't have enough resources. It's none of us have enough resources. Every time we ask a survey, it happened in this survey, what are the major issues to you solving your employee engagement problems? Guess what? I don't have enough resources. Give me more resources. What we're going to talk about today is a way that no matter what resources you have, and by the way, I want you to all have an extra $1 billion each, so just for the record, to do this, because this is so important. But how can we work more effectively within the resources we have, right? To get to that. And the third thing I want to say that is not your problem and is not going to save you and not move the needle is technology. This is a big one, because boy, there's a lot of cool technology out there now, right? All of us out there with booths or walk around, we have all kinds of cool technology, cool tricks. We have artificial intelligence. We have predictive algorithms. We have real-time blah, 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 blah. The data is being flown around, and like we can do things in continuous. These are all great tools, but they're tools. They're not going to solve the fundamental issue, right? If we're talking about an outcome that we want to make that's about passion and about excitement, we're not going to solve it with math. Math is not going to solve that issue, right? I mean, if you just think about it fundamentally. So these are all great tools. We need to have them. I'm glad they're in development. And my engineers are going to hate me because they hate when I make this point because they're doing a lot of cool work, but it's a very important point to make. What we need to focus on, my position, what we need to focus on, if we want to really, really move the needle and transform employee engagement, is you need to have a psychological framework for change in your organization. You need to have a psychological framework for change. I want to talk about what that means. I don't mean a framework. Like everybody, a lot of people have frameworks. A lot of people, you know, they've created their own frameworks. They're using other frameworks. There's all kinds of opportunities out there to grab hold of opinions about what makes employee engagement go. I'm saying you need a psychological framework. A psychological framework, what am I talking about here? Psychological framework is science. Employee engagement, I'm a psychologist, and a lot of times people say, oh, that's squishy. They call it squishy, or they call it soft. It's always very exciting and flattering to hear that from people, just in casual conversation. It's not. It's a science. It's been around for decades. It's empirical. In other words, we measure things. We measure precisely. If we define a construct, if we want to say something like meaning or purpose or some of the other things I'm going to get to, it will not fly for you to just give a one-word definition or cite the dictionary. You better give a definition, and then you better have data and validation to back up your measuring what you say you're measuring. You better have real hard data to show that you're not just predicting an outcome, but that you can show cause and effect relationships. This is another big one. 90% of all the data that I see out there on the market is showing essentially correlational data. Look how well this metric predicts this metric. That is not going to help you in your employee engagement work. It might be a signpost to something good. It could also be a signpost to something that's a red herring. And if I had more time in this talk, I'd spend 10 minutes giving you a breakdown of how that works. But it's very important to not confuse those things. What you need is a science that said, all right, these are the important factors. Now we're going to use these factors, and we're going to show empirically that it has an impact. Psychological science does that in exactly this area. Peer-reviewed, another big one. If you have a model right now that you're using, you may have a lot of data. You may be wondering, gee, is this a model? Is this not a model? There's a quick litmus test, is can you put your hands on a scientific peer-reviewed study that proves your model is effective? Can you put your hands on that? Right? Hopefully you can put your hands on more things like that. Because if that exists, then that model has been through some empirical rigor. That model is going to be able to something that you can rely on as being effective. And the other great benefit is that model can be used by others to replicate and extend the benefits of that model and how it can be applied. Why we need a psychological framework for this issue is pretty simple. And that is engagement, and all these things we're looking at are psychological experiences. These are deep emotional experiences. We might disagree on the definition of engagement, but we all agree that that's the nature of what engagement is. If this is a deep emotional issue, if this is an issue of passion and purpose and meaning and things that are life-changing, almost religious, this is the closest thing to love that we have in our organizations. It makes sense that we need to bring to it the respect it deserves in terms of having a psychological model for understanding it. But too often, and I understand why this happens, I get pulled in this direction all the time. We want to think about engagement like this. We want to think about engagement like, okay, you know what I need to do? I need to find the knobs that I can turn that will bring engagement out of my employee. I got to find those knobs. So I'm going to give surveys, I'm going to look at data, I'm going to analyze it, I'm going to look at graphs, I'm going to look at outcomes in order to see what's happening. And so we have this functional model for how things work in the engagement space where we're going to try various things. Let's do more team building as an activity. Let's mandate. I hear communication is important. People said they don't feel like they're communicating enough on the survey. I'll tell you what, let's mandate that there's once-a-week communication meetings with all the teams. Let's do more training with employees. Let's institute more one-on-ones so that communications can improve. We do all of these things in earnest. Some will work, some don't work. We're trying all these things, but these are essentially those knobs we try to turn so that we can build engagement. This is the model that I see everywhere, and this is not how it's actually working. This is not how it's working. We have all these activities that we're doing, but when those activities are happening, there's a mediator in between. There's something that's happening in between, which is people are having experiences from all of those activities, from the policy, from the meeting, from the phone call. I mean, if you ask 5 people who leave a meeting about the meeting, you're going to get 5 different answers to that question. So simply, you're going to get so much noise over here that we're always going to be stuck in this cycle of throwing spaghetti against the wall and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And it's those experiences that drive engagement. And so understanding what's in the middle becomes the most critical piece in being able to give the feedback that we need to our managers and to our employees and to our leaders so that we can be building the experiences that truly drive and allow engagement to emerge. And right now, the issue is that that's a black box. That's a black box in the vast majority of organizations. In our survey that we just completed, there were a lot of organizations that said that they used a model and even said that they used behavioral science. But then we asked them to actually specify what model they were using. And the reality is that the reason I went over what makes an empirical model is that the models really weren't psychological models. They were consulting models. They were a number of other things, right? Actually, only 5% of companies that we looked at were using a psychological framework in this way. Right? That's why I'm up here speaking about this in such an impassioned way. Right? And in a few minutes, I'm going to get to the incredible evidence to back up these claims that this is where you should be going. But I want to point out that this is the huge gap, and this is something that we need to fix. There is the availability of models right now. This isn't something we have to build from scratch. And I'm going to talk about one in particular that really stands head and shoulders above the rest in terms of its ability, I think, to fit in here and be really powerful to help us transform our efforts. The model can help, and I just want to speak because I've been talking a lot on the, I don't know, I want to say theoretical, but maybe inspirational level, structural level, strategic level. Let me be practical for just a moment, all right? Because you need to have a model that, number one, everyone can understand and adopt. Having a model that has 47 different components, having a model that changes every 6 months based on whatever data might be shifting, having a model that has lots of ways to look at data but not really understand what each of the components are or how the components interact with one another, that gets in the way of understanding. You need to have a model that is based in basic psychological truths that managers can understand and put to work, leaders can understand and help to champion throughout the organization, and employees can understand both in the context of being able to contribute to the team and to performance, but also in terms of their own growth and their own work-life balance and the things that excite them when they get up in the morning, because that's ultimately what engagement is. You need to be able to measure those things, right? Again, they can't be simply aspirational. This is where I go back into that nerd state of, if you're going to say purpose is the important thing, how are you measuring that? How do you validate it? How do you track it? Is it predictive? Is it cause and effect? So we want to be able to take those factors, we want to be able to measure them accurately. And then we want to have evidence-based recommendations, prescriptive actions that people can take to move those experiential needles, build greater engagement, as well as well-being and a host of other outcomes. And the model that is incredibly promising for this is a model called self-determination theory. How many people here have heard of self-determination theory? Okay, smattering of hands. How many people have read Drive by Dan Pink? All right, a lot more hands. If you've read Drive by Dan Pink, you have familiarity with I should have said, how many people have Drive by Dan Pink on their bookshelf? Oh yeah, a lot more hands go up. If you've read Drive by Dan Pink, then you have had exposure to self-determination theory. Drive was based almost entirely on this model and this framework. Self-determination theory was developed several decades ago by my partners in Motivation Works, Ed Deci and Richard Ryan. And when I talked about all that early research I did, looking at engagement and motivation, I had the great fortune to meet them before the theory had even taken root, and to have worked with them for the last 30 years. And what's amazing about this theory is its growth just over the last 10 years. So it's probably been almost 10 years since Strive. But if you look at self-determination theory and you look at the number of citations, it has exploded in growth because people in all contexts, and particularly corporate contexts, are realizing that we need a better model. We need to have those psychological models for motivation because we've shifted to a world where everyone is more empowered. Everyone is more empowered. Everyone feels like they have more choices. Everybody can make jobs. We have gig economies. We have all these things. If we don't understand motivation better and engagement better, we're not going to be able to succeed. And so the reason I bring this up, you can see here on the right-hand side of the chart, is that there's about 30,000 publications every year, empirical studies, book chapters, all kinds of things about the theory. All those resources are available to you. If you want to look at the application of self-determination theory in the retail sector, you want to get into the weeds about this over here, chances are there's a published study that you can look at to really understand how to apply this, right? And so these resources are all available. You probably don't want to wade through all 31,000 articles, but you can go to selfdeterminationtheory.org, and that URL's on a slide in just a little bit. And that's a great starting place to digging into these resources. But what I want to give today is I just want to give you 3 takeaways. I was hoping for bigger laughs on this pun slide. Let's see, it's a takeaway. No, never mind, forget it. It's late. Everybody's going to be drinking in an hour. It doesn't matter. Okay, the first thing. We need to reorient our very concept of motivation and engagement. We need to reorient around it. Right? This is kind of the way that, with behaviorism back in the 50s and 60s, this is the way that people saw behaviorism. Back then, we would do things to manipulate and control. And that still goes on in business environments. But this is an enlightened group. So we've kind of moved on from that. Now we say, well, we need to be able to motivate our teams, right? So this one's wrong. We have more of kind of this model. Like, how do I figure out how to give motivation? How do I motivate my team and do all these things for the organization? And the thing that I want to say today is that this also is wrong. This also is wrong. You are not the actor in the motivational equation. The manager is not the actor in the motivational equation. Or to put it really bluntly, we don't have the power to motivate anybody except ourselves, right? We can try to make people do things. We can try to cajole them. We can try to punish them. We can try to force them. We can try to dangle rewards in front of them to get them to move. But ultimately, it's how that person experiences things and decides to act that matters. Every individual employee in our organizations is responsible for their own motivation. And it's really about understanding motivation and facilitating their satisfaction of what we're going to call high-quality motivation that leads you to success and leads you to engaged employees. The second takeaway is I want to talk for a minute about motivation itself and how we define motivation. Motivation is often talked about as kind of this binary state. We have, I'm very motivated or I'm not motivated. If you're measuring motivation, most motivation surveys, people say, oh, I measure motivation in my employee engagement survey, and there'll be an item that says, how motivated are you for this task, right? So again, it's this binary state. But what this silly dinosaur thing illustrates is more doesn't mean better. These people are pretty motivated, right? But that doesn't mean that this is a good thing. And in the workplace, I just want to take a quick example of the daily stand-up meeting. It's loved, it's hated, it's there, right? Managers do these daily stand-up meetings. They want to figure out what's going on. And if you ask people, you could ask all these people how motivated they are for the daily stand-up meeting. They might all give you the same score. But if you ask what are the reasons, you get this mix of responses. It's a requirement. I really love hanging out with everybody. The coffee's good. I learn a lot. I mean, it's all over the spectrum, right? So what does your number really tell you about what's going on? Again, it's just an outcome. It's not going to help you take action. The great thing about self-determination theory is, just to nerd out for those nerds in the audience, there's a name called organismic integration theory. We don't use that when we're usually talking to normal people because it's a little bit of a troubling label, but that's what academics do. And it talks about how there are actually different dimensions of motivation, right? I've arranged these responses along a dimension of low quality forms of motivation to high quality forms of motivation, right? And these things are all normal, and you know what? I might have 3 or 4 of these different reasons for going to the stand-up meeting. What's important is I need to get a measurement, I need to get an understanding of my overall profile. And there are ways to measure each of these things discretely and compute a motivational profile, right? So that you can get to that level of granularity, so that you're able to see exactly what's going on so that you can move in and take action and give feedback to take action. And what the data shows is that this is an incredibly strong predictor of low motivational quality forms predicting bad outcomes across the board, and high motivational quality predicting good outcomes. And the reason this is so exciting is, as most of us know, 2 out of 3 managers don't find employee engagement data actionable. And only about half of all the EE solutions out there are even giving managers a report, right? They can't if they don't know what's going on. You can't give that level of granularity. Now it's possible by taking this continuum that you can give managers a report on their team. You can give them evidence-based recommendations based on that profile to their team. You can give leadership an overall understanding of what's happening in a way that's actionable. And guess what? You can give every individual employee a report, not just a number that then you have to try to explain or give context to or worry about, or we're all worried about how our employees are going to act if they understand what's going on. How do we give them the information? We walk on eggshells with them. These are employee engagement programs. Let's get the employees involved. Let's give them some feedback to help them to grow, right? And the last thing I want to touch on today is, what are the things that drive that employee engagement? What are the things that drive it? What drives it are basic psychological needs. What drives that high motivation quality are basic psychological needs. I don't have as much time to go into this as I'd like. But when I talk about basic psychological needs, I'm talking about it in the same way I talk about physical needs, right? In that kind of fundamental way. We all have physical needs, right? And it's not like you have a physical need for this cupcake, right? That's a want. The physical need, though, is hunger. We all have hunger. And it doesn't matter if we don't believe in hunger. Well, I don't really buy the hunger theory. In a few hours, we're going to have a problem because it's a basic need, right? It doesn't matter. We don't have to talk about, let's talk a little bit about millennials having different physiological needs. Nope. Millennials get hungry just like older people do, like me. It turns out in psychology, it's the same thing. We have basic psychological needs that we all share, right? I want to go over what those are very briefly, but there's tons of literature on this. The first is the need for autonomy, probably the most important need in the entire model. The need for autonomy is our desire to be the authors of our lives, of what we're doing. Day to day, it feels like we want to endorse the actions that we're taking. We want to feel volitional about what we're doing. Now, notice, I didn't use the words that most people use to describe autonomy. Freedom, choice, independence, because that's not what autonomy is. Sure, if I have choice, that lets me be the author of my life a little bit easier. I like to have choice. I like to have those things when they're meaningful. But the most important thing in autonomy is that I endorse and I'm volitional. This is important in a work context because a lot of times there can't be choice, right? And so to increase autonomy, you need to understand different methods, right? But that doesn't mean that they're not going to work to build autonomy. We give up autonomy all the time in our lives. We actively marry people and give up freedom. I mean, we don't give up autonomy, we give up freedom and independence, right? I guess we do give up autonomy from time to time. But we give up freedom, we give up independence, and we can still feel autonomous. We still feel very volitional about that, right? When we're giving it up for something that we really believe in. The second need in the model is the need for relatedness. And the need for relatedness is that desire to connect to other people, but in a very clear way, which is I matter to you, and you matter to me, right? And we matter to each other. It's not simply having social tools and staring at your phone. It's that sense of mattering that goes on, belongingness. And the third basic psychological need is the need for mastery. We want to feel successful in what we're doing, but we also want to feel a sense of growth and elaboration, right? We want to feel these things. And again, I could easily talk for hours on each of these needs and go into details about how we measure them and how we're able to then take actions in order to intervene with managers and employees on them. But these needs are the things that when they're fulfilled, emergent engagement happens. Engagement just emerges from these needs being satisfied. You don't even have to worry about it anymore. Your needles are going to go up significantly. Now again, these all sound like I have pictures of people climbing mountains and doing things, and it all feels really great. But let me just say that these are not just aspirational ideas, right? They're not aspirational ideas. This is the hard science. And there's all kinds of data I could talk about, but I just want to nerd out about one study that came out this year, which was a meta-analysis. For those of you who don't know, a meta-analysis is when you take a whole bunch of other studies and you basically look across all of them and say, all right, taken as a whole, are there really any impacts of the thing that I want to look at? Are there really any impacts? And so there are 72 different published studies looking at this model and how it affects workplaces. And there was a meta-analysis done looking at all of those studies. And what it found was, across 7 countries, that focusing efforts on these needs positively drives engagement and satisfaction at a highly significant rate. Amongst all the factors they were looking at, these were factors that ranked highest. It is a positive predictor of well-being and health. It's a positive predictor of retention and similar sorts of things. And this is the big one for buy-in, this is data confirming a model that is predicting performance. It's predicting the financial performance of the companies. So this is the holistic model that can address the needs of the individual employee and the organization at the same time, right? SDT, just to close up here, helps culture really everywhere. And that's the other thing I want to mention about it. Yes, it affects employee engagement, but as you might imagine, since we're talking about a fundamental model for human psychology and for well-being, it also helps with compliance and ethics. There's research on all of these things. It helps with performance, with leadership training. It helps with health and wellness. It helps with diversity and inclusion. These are the principles, these ideas of motivational quality, and primarily these needs of these basic need fulfillment, being able to measure how they're fulfilled and measure how they're supported by managers and other parts of your organization. Focusing on these things is the tide that will raise all of these important boats and help to integrate them. And so just to wrap up, I just want to summarize. I would really encourage all of you, please consider that we've had the wrong idea about the complexity of how this works. We haven't actually given employee engagement, even though we talk about it in these incredibly excited ways, we haven't given it the seriousness it deserves. It's a complex psychological outcome. It needs a complex psychological model. It needs a validated psychological model to help us to take action. Secondly, remember that we should stay humble about motivation and engagement. Ed Deci once said, and for years I was really insulted by this, I thought this was so insensitive, but then I came to understand it. He said, you know, whenever I get the urge to help somebody, if possible, I try to lie down and wait for the feeling to pass. And it'll kill me for repeating that here. But Ed didn't mean he didn't want to help people. He's one of the most caring people I know. What he meant is a lot of times when we have the urge that we're going to jump in and we're going to do things for people, that isn't actually supporting their basic needs. It's not being autonomy supportive of who they are. It's not helping them to grow. So we have to take a more circumspect view of what we're doing. And finally, focus on those basic needs. If you do nothing else, no matter how many other metrics you're collecting, if you really get into this literature and you make these basic needs part of your values and part of your model and you measure them and you're able to show them to move, all of the outcomes you care about will improve. Engagement will improve. We'll break through that stupid Gallup chart, finally. And we'll start to achieve the results that this field deserves, our organizations deserve, and all the people and employees that we have in our organizations that they deserve as well. Thanks very much.